I thought I was helping a young woman build her life. For 7 years, I woke before dawn, worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, and told myself that every dollar drained from our savings was an investment in something beautiful. A grieving girl's future, a doctor's beginning, the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. I was wrong about all of it, not just about Natalie, not just about the money. I was wrong about the man who had slept beside me for 12 years, who knew everything, who had helped plan everything, and who smiled at me over dinner every single night while the trap was being carefully and deliberately set beneath my feet. The certified envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, cool and gray, the maple outside the kitchen window finally giving up on summer. I had just made coffee. The expensive dark roast Mark still preferred, the kind I kept buying even as our savings dipped lower every month, a small faithfulness to a habit that had outlasted the comfort that created it. And the steam was rising lazily from my mug when the doorbell rang. I signed without looking at the return address. I set the envelope on the counter next to the coffee. I took one sip, then I opened it. Inside was a 12-page civil complaint filed in the County Court of Appeals, naming me as the sole defendant in a case brought by Dr. Natalie Howe. She was suing me for $240,000. She was describing every tuition payment, every rent check, every exam fee and emergency transfer I had made over 7 years as unlawfully retained funds from the estate of the deceased. She was claiming, in the careful, bloodless language of litigation, that I had stolen from my dead sister's daughter. I stood at the kitchen counter and read the words, and then read them again, and then set the pages down and looked out the window at the maple and thought, this is not real. This cannot be real. You need to understand who I was before that Tuesday morning to understand what it meant. My name is Clara Whitfield. I am 44 years old. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio, the eldest of 2 sisters, the responsible one, the one who kept the lists and remembered the appointments and prepared for worst-case scenarios the way our mother had taught us to, with the quiet diligence of people who know that life does not warn you before it changes. My sister Dana was the other kind of person entirely. Beautiful, impulsive, luminous in every room she entered, constitutionally unable to plan further than next week and somehow always landing on her feet regardless. We were different in every way that counted on paper and identical in every way that mattered underneath. And I spent 20 years pretending to be exasperated by her when what I actually felt was something closer to reverent awe. When Dana married Thomas Howe in a backyard ceremony with string lights and borrowed wooden chairs, I stood beside her as maid of honor and danced barefoot on the grass until the neighbors appeared at the fence. When she called me before 6 in the morning to say she was pregnant, her voice already shaking with laughter, I sat up in bed and cried before she finished the sentence. She named her daughter Natalie. She sent me photographs every week without fail. When Natalie was 6 years old, Dana died of a brain aneurysm at the kitchen table while making her morning coffee. She was 31 years old. She did not suffer. She did not have time to. I drove 4 hours in silence. No radio, no music, no podcasts. I sat on Thomas's kitchen floor while he wept with his hands over his face. I watched 6-year-old Natalie come downstairs in her pajamas, holding the stuffed rabbit with the torn ear, and look at her father's face and understand, in the wordless way that children understand catastrophe, that something enormous and irreversible had happened. I made macaroni and cheese because it was the only thing in the pantry, and because doing something with my hands kept me from collapse. I drove home at midnight and lay beside Mark in the dark, and didn't speak until morning. Mark and I had been married 3 years when Dana died. We had a modest house in Columbus. Wood floors, a vegetable garden that survived on more hope than expertise, a second bathroom with a faucet that dripped no matter how many times we had it repaired. Mark was a civil engineer, methodical, quiet, reliable in the contained way that introverts are reliable, love expressed through action rather than declaration. Through the faucet fixed and the trip planned and the hand placed over yours at the kitchen table without explanation. The morning after Dana's funeral, while I sat unable to eat or think in consecutive sentences, he put his hand over mine and said simply, "Whatever you need to do, we'll do it." I believed him. I had every reason to believe him. That belief would cost me nearly everything I had. Thomas survived Dana by 2 years, working and parenting and grieving in the methodical way of a man who has lost the color from his world and doesn't know yet what to replace it with. When he called to tell me about the cancer diagnosis, the decision about Natalie made itself. She moved in with us in March. 9 years old, 1 suitcase, a backpack of chapter books, the rabbit. Mark had painted her room the previous weekend in sage green because I remembered Dana saying once that Natalie's favorite color was the color of new grass in spring. He had built her a bookshelf and bought a desk lamp with an adjustable arm. I enrolled her in the school 3 blocks away and memorized her teachers' names before she arrived. These were not grand gestures. They were just what you do when a child comes to live with you and you want her to feel that she belongs. She called me Aunt Clara. She ate 3 bowls of my chicken soup the first Sunday and fell asleep on our couch under a quilt Mark had brought from upstairs without being asked. We became, in the unremarkable daily way that matters more than ceremony, a family. She was brilliant, not in the pleasant, encouraged way that affectionate adults ascribe ordinary cleverness to children they love, genuinely, relentlessly, sometimes inconveniently brilliant, with a mind that seized problems and refused to release them until every angle had been turned inside out. By 16, she had announced, in the flat declarative register she used for all important statements, that she was going to be a cardiologist. Not "I want to be." She was going to be. The future tense of someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for time to catch up. I believed her instantly and without reservation. I also immediately opened a spreadsheet and spent the next hour staring at numbers that hollowed out my stomach. Medical school costs money in a way that resists ordinary description. Natalie earned a partial scholarship to a strong program in Chicago. A real achievement. One I was proud of in a physical, chest-expanding way that had nothing to do with finances and everything to do with watching Dana's daughter step into the life she had decided she deserved. But partial meant the remaining gap, across 4 years of medical school plus 2 years of pre-medical expense, was something north of $200,000. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, with the scholarship letter lying between the coffee mugs, and went through the numbers together. Mark ran a pencil down the columns in silence. Then he set the pencil down and looked at me and said, "We can do this." I reached across the table and took Natalie's hand. She was 18 years old, and she looked terrified in the specific way that very capable people look, terrified when they realize how much they need someone. And I told her not to worry about the numbers. That was my job. Her job was to become a doctor. 7 years. I want you to hold that number for a moment. 7 years of tuition payments, rent deposits on Chicago apartments, textbooks that cost as much as a car payment, board exam fees, licensing fees, the emergency transfers that came at 2 in the morning when something broke or failed or ran out. We refinanced the house twice. I took on a second job teaching composition at the community college. 3 evenings a week, home by 10, grading papers until midnight at the kitchen table while Mark slept. We stopped taking vacations, not with dramatic announcement, but gradually, the way you stop doing things that have quietly become impossible. I bought cheaper coffee. I drove my car 2 years past what was sensible. I learned to find a certain quiet satisfaction in managed economies, in the particular competence of making the numbers work when they don't want to. Not once across those 7 years, not in a single moment, not in a single thought, did I think of the money as anything other than freely given. Not a loan, not an investment expecting return, just what you do for family, just what Dana would have done if she had lived. Natalie came home for Christmas every year and Thanksgiving most years, and occasionally in the summer when her schedule allowed. Each visit she was thinner, sharper, more certain of herself and more complicated, more practiced in the professional containment that medicine requires and that can, if you are not careful, become indistinguishable from the person it was supposed to only be a costume for. I loved her through each version of herself. We talked on Sunday evenings. She asked about the garden and my night classes and whether the bathroom faucet had finally been properly repaired. I thought these small questions were the threads that kept us connected across the distance. I understand now that she was paying attention, tracking the texture of our daily life, storing small details. I did not understand then what she might be storing them for. The changes began approximately 8 months before the envelope arrived. I can trace them now with the precision that only hindsight allows. Each small moment I rationalized and set aside. I am not proud of how long I spent not seeing what was there to be seen, but I also understand it. I had spent 15 years building a life whose foundation required certain people to be trustworthy, and the mind will go to extraordinary lengths to protect the architecture it has built around itself. The Sunday calls thinned first. For years they had been reliable as weather. Early evening, after her shift, my habitual place on the back porch with a glass of wine and the garden going blue in the dusk. After she passed her board exams in the spring, the calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then initiated almost entirely by me and answered with a new smoothness, a new carefulness. The particular quality of a person who is managing what they reveal rather than simply talking. She stopped asking about our lives. I told myself it was residency, which was genuinely brutal. I had received enough 2 a.m. weeping calls over the previous years to understand precisely how much those hours cost a person. But something in the quality of her absence was different now, and I should have trusted that difference. She stopped asking about our finances. She stopped asking about the house. I understand now why. She had already been briefed. She already knew. Mark's distraction I attributed to the restructuring at his company. New responsibilities, more travel, the visible weight that settled across his shoulders in the evenings. I was accommodating. I made the dinners he liked. I gave him what I believed was space, and what I now understand was simply cover. The specific quality of his distraction was not work stress. I know that now because I have since learned what guilt looks like on a person not practiced at carrying it. The slight overanimation on neutral subjects, the studied casualness in moments that don't require it, the half-second too quickly reaching for a phone when a notification sounds. There was a Sunday in July. I was on the back porch with a stack of papers to grade, the heat thick and still, the kind of Ohio July that sits in the house even with all the windows open. I heard Mark's voice from inside, low, careful, in the register he drops into when he doesn't want to be overheard. I set down my pen and went inside. He was ending the call as I appeared in the hallway, and the expression on his face arranged itself into neutrality, 1 second too slowly. "Daniel, from work," he said, and smiled in a way that almost reached his eyes. I went to the kitchen. I poured him iced tea and brought it to him. I let the moment seal itself over and sink, the way you let small things sink when you are not yet ready to know what they mean. There was a September afternoon when I was looking for refinancing documents in the study filing cabinet, and a folder slid forward into view that I had not put there. The tab read NH in Mark's handwriting, with a date from 7 months prior. I opened it. Inside were 2 printed pages of email correspondence. I read the first line, redocumentation of funds transferred, informal estate administration, and then Mark appeared in the doorway, crossed the room in 4 deliberate steps, and lifted the mortgage folder from my hands with a smoothness that told me the movement had been mentally rehearsed. "Come on, I'll drive you to the appointment," he said, and we were in the car and out of the driveway before I had finished understanding what I had just not been allowed to read. I thought about that folder twice in the weeks that followed. Each time I told myself I would ask him about it when the right moment presented itself. The right moment never came. He had been ensuring that it wouldn't. I read the complaint 3 times. The first time I couldn't comprehend it. The second time I could understand the individual sentences but not accept them as describing my actual life. The third time, standing in the hallway, the October light cutting through the glass panel beside the front door at an angle that made the white pages nearly impossible to look at directly. I understood. The complaint alleged that Thomas Howe's estate had included not only the $30,000 life insurance policy I had known about, but a second informal financial arrangement, a sum held in an account that I had supposedly administered as de facto trustee without legal authority. It alleged commingling of funds, mismanagement of assets, unlawful distribution. It alleged that the money I had given Natalie had come not from our joint accounts, but from resources that legally belonged to her. $240,000, with interest. It was a fiction, constructed carefully, dressed in specific legal language, built from fabricated documentation. Someone had spent significant time and money building it, and that someone had had access to the fine details of our financial history, our house refinancing, our savings patterns, the precise amounts and dates of every transfer I had made over 7 years. Only 2 people had that access. One of them had just sued me. The other was somewhere in this city with his phone in his hand, waiting for me to call. My legs stopped working. I sat down on the hallway floor, back against the wall, the complaint spread across my knees. The carpet was rough under my palms. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A cardinal was singing outside, one clear, insistent note repeating itself into the October silence, indifferent to what was happening inside the house. I sat there and tried to breathe and tried to locate myself inside my own life and found that the coordinates I had always relied on were simply gone. I picked up my phone. I called Mark. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was not in a meeting, not driving, and had his phone within immediate reach. "There is a legal complaint on my kitchen counter," I said. My voice was very quiet, and I noted its quietness from a distance, the way you notice peripheral details in shock because the central thing is too large to look at directly. "Natalie is suing me for $240,000. She says the money I gave her came from Thomas's estate and that I administered it without legal authority." The pause that followed was approximately 2 seconds long. It was not the pause of a man who has just been told something incomprehensible. It was the pause of a man who had been waiting for a specific sentence and is now moving carefully toward a response he has prepared. "Clara," he said, "did you know about this?" Silence. Not brief. 8 full seconds. I counted them standing in my hallway, watching a cardinal settle on the maple branch outside the window and then lift off again into the gray sky. Mark came home at 6:17. I know the exact time because I had been watching the microwave clock for 3 hours, sitting at the kitchen table with the complaint in front of me and a glass of water I hadn't touched. I heard his key in the front door. I heard his coat on the hook. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me, and then he looked at the complaint, and something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite relief, something in between that I had never seen on him before, and that I recognized immediately as the expression of a person who has been dreading a specific conversation and is now standing at its edge. "Sit down," I said. My voice was very quiet. I had expected rage, the hot, disorganized kind that breaks things. What I had instead was something colder and more precise, like a scalpel. "Sit down and tell me everything, not the version you worked out on the drive home, the actual truth." He sat across from me and folded his hands on the table and looked at them. "I found out about it 6 months ago," he began, in a careful, measured voice aimed at a particular effect. "Natalie called me. She said she'd been talking to a lawyer about Thomas's estate, and there were questions about how the money was managed." "Stop," I said. He stopped. "The folder in the filing cabinet, the emails about estate documentation, you removed it from my hands." He went very still. Did you give her our financial records? I asked. Our records. The dates, the amounts. 6 years of transfers. To the dollar, to the day. The complaint cites them perfectly. She couldn't have known those numbers without our files. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She needed documentation, he said. She said she deserved to know where her father's money went, and I thought I didn't think it would go this far. I stood up from the table. I walked to the sink and stood with my back to him, looking out at the dark garden. The maple was a black shape against a darker sky. The vegetable beds he had built 3 years ago were pale outlines in the November cold. I stood there and breathed and said nothing for a very long time. You gave her the ammunition, I said finally, and you watched her load it for 6 months, while I made your coffee and graded papers and trusted you completely. He started to speak. Something about Natalie's grief, about how she had been through so much, about wanting to help. And I held up one hand. He stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind moved through the maple. I need you to leave tonight, I said. Not because I'm ending everything right now, because I cannot be in the same room as you and think clearly, and I need to think clearly. I kept my voice level. It cost something. Go to your brother's. Go to a hotel. I'll call you when I'm ready. He left. He took a bag from upstairs, and then the front door opened and closed, and I was alone in the house for the first time in 12 years, and the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. I sat back down at the kitchen table and I thought, not frantically, carefully, coldly, the way you think when shock has passed and left behind a specific, functional kind of clarity. I thought about what I knew, what I could prove, and what I needed to find out. I thought about Thomas's estate, about Gerald, about the $31,000, and whether any legitimate legal thread existed to be pulled. I thought about Natalie, about who she had been at 9 years old and who she had become, and at what point she had decided to do this, and why. I sat in the kitchen until somewhere around 9 o'clock, and then I picked up my phone and called my father. My father is 71 years old, and he is the most pragmatic person I have ever known. He was a high school principal for 30 years. When I finished telling him everything, the complaint, the folder, Mark's confession, the financial records, he was quiet for exactly 1 moment. "Do you have a civil lawyer?" he said. "No. I know someone. Philip Garner. He's good and he's honest. I'm calling him tonight." "It's Saturday," I said. "I know," my father said. "I'm calling him tonight." And before he hung up, he said one more thing. "Clara, find the documentation. Find where it came from. That is your case." Philip Garner was 60, broad-shouldered with the patient eyes of someone who has heard a great many stories and learned to listen to all of them without flinching. He read the complaint in silence, turning pages with methodical care. Then he set it down and looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "The informal trust allegation is the entire case. Without it, the money was simply a family gift, and gifts are not recoverable at law. So the question is, what documentation they have to establish this trust. Have you ever signed anything in connection with Thomas's estate? Any document naming you as trustee, administrator, custodian? Anything at all?" "No," I said. "Absolutely not." "Then either they are bluffing, expensive and unlikely, or there is a document that purports to bear your signature that you did not sign." He said it calmly, as a logical inference, and the words landed in the quiet office, and the floor shifted beneath me. But differently now. Not the tilting feeling of collapse, the specific lurch of a new and terrible thing snapping into focus. I called Thomas's brother Gerald that afternoon. I had not spoken to him in 4 years. When I read him the relevant paragraph of the complaint, the informal trust, the de facto trustee, the silence on his end was the silence of genuine shock, and then of something that was closer to fear. She contacted me 8 months ago, he said. Said she was researching her father's estate and asked for all the documentation. I sent her everything. The account statements, the original trust instrument, all of it. He paused. 2 months later, she called back and said she'd found a discrepancy. She emailed me a letter she said she'd found in her father's belongings, signed by Thomas, naming you as informal administrator of estate funds. I sat in Philip Garner's parking lot in the November cold and felt everything shift again. Did you verify it? I said. I didn't question it, Gerald said, and his voice was heavy with the specific shame of a person who understands too late what their inaction made possible. It looked like Thomas's letterhead. I thought maybe I'd missed something in the original settlement. Clara, I should have told the lawyer. I should have told you. I'm sorry. I called Philip immediately from the parking lot. He listened. Then he said, "A letter from a deceased person establishing a legal instrument is one of the most examinable documents in forensic evidence. Ink dating, paper composition, handwriting analysis. If it's forged, and based on what you're describing, I believe it is, it will not survive scrutiny. And when it fails, everything built on it fails with it." He paused. "We file for discovery Monday morning and demand production of every document underlying the trust claim. This ends quickly or it ends badly for whoever made that letter. Either way, it ends." The forensic examination took 11 days. The court granted Philip's emergency motion without significant resistance. The document was the sole evidentiary basis for the trust claim, and the judge agreed it was subject to verification before the case could proceed. The examiner's report was 14 pages of detailed scientific analysis. The ink was not from the era the letter claimed. The paper had been chemically treated to appear older. The signature bore measurable inconsistencies with verified samples of Thomas's handwriting across 12 authenticated documents. The letter was a forgery, recent, deliberate, and constructed with specific legal intent. Natalie's legal team withdrew the trust allegation 48 hours after receiving the report. Without the trust, the complaint had no foundation. The case was dismissed, not settled, dismissed, with a notation in the record that the plaintiff's core evidentiary document had been found to be fraudulent. The criminal investigation that followed identified the source of the forgery as a paralegal named Donna Cruz, employed by the estate planning firm Natalie had initially consulted in Cincinnati. Donna Cruz was connected to a network that identified potential inheritance disputes, manufactured legal grounds for litigation, and collected a percentage of any resulting settlement. She had produced the forged letter. She had provided it to Natalie as a genuine document found in her father's belongings. She had, in the process, drawn Natalie into a fraud Natalie did not know she was participating in. Donna Cruz was charged with forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. She pled guilty the following spring. The firm lost its operating license. Natalie called me 2 days after the dismissal. It was late evening. I was in the kitchen, always the kitchen. That room that had held so many of the turning points of the last 15 years. She said my name, and then she didn't speak for a moment. "I didn't know," she said. "The letter, I was told it was found in storage with my father's other papers. I believed it was real. I believed I was protecting what was rightfully mine." Her voice broke along the edge of the sentence. "I believed someone who was lying to me, and in doing that, I accused you of something that wasn't true. After everything you did for me, after everything you gave up." A long pause. "I'm sorry, Clara. I know that's not—" "No," I said. "It isn't. Not today." I said it without cruelty, the way you say a true thing when the kindness would be in not looking away from it. "Maybe eventually, but not today." She said she understood. We hung up and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, and then I put the kettle on and made tea and sat down and, for the first time in 4 months, I cried. Not from grief exactly, or not only from grief, from the specific exhaustion of a person who has held everything together at great cost for a very long time and has finally reached the moment when the holding is no longer necessary. Mark and I separated in November. It was not a dramatic ending. It was, in some ways, more painful than drama would have been. Quiet, sad, conducted with the careful courtesy of two people who have hurt each other and are not sure how to exist in the same room. He moved into an apartment. We met with a mediator twice. He did not contest the house. He cooperated with the investigation when asked, which was the last right thing I watched him do. That was 16 months ago. I still live in the house in Columbus. The vegetable garden survived the winter the way it always does, stubbornly, reasserting itself in April as if the months between were none of its concern. I planted new tomatoes this spring. I fixed the bathroom faucet myself, which took an entire Saturday and 3 YouTube videos, and produced a disproportionate but entirely genuine sense of triumph. I still teach Tuesday and Thursday nights at the community college. I replaced the old car. I started drinking the expensive coffee again, not for Mark's sake this time, but for mine. Natalie sent me a handwritten letter in March. I read it once and put it in a drawer. Some bridges, once taken apart, need to be rebuilt from the foundation, slowly with different materials than the ones that failed. Some don't get rebuilt at all, and you learn to navigate the river a different way. I haven't decided yet which kind this is. I'm giving myself time to decide, which is itself a kind of victory. The ability to wait, to not rush the reckoning, to let the shape of what happened settle into its true dimensions before deciding what it means. What I know is this: I am 44 years old and I live in my house, and my garden grows and the faucet doesn't drip and the savings account is slowly recovering. I invested 7 years and $240,000 in someone's future, and the future arrived and turned around and tried to take everything I had. It failed. Not because I was stronger than it, though I was, because the truth was stronger than the lie, and I had enough left in me to wait for that to matter. I think about Dana on mornings when the light comes through the kitchen window at a particular angle that feels like remembering. I think she would have been furious. I think she also would have been sitting at this table right now, eating the tomatoes I grew myself, telling me something impractical and probably correct about forgiveness. She was always the one who believed that love didn't have to be transactional to be real. I spent 7 years proving she was right. I spent 4 months proving that the people who tried to make it otherwise were wrong. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. "We should talk when I get home," he said finally. That is not an answer. "Clara, Mark, did you know she was going to do this?" One more second. And in that second, before any word was spoken and before any excuse arrived, the answer came through the silence with a clarity that no words could have matched. The floor of the life I had built, carefully, faithfully, at the cost of 7 years and nearly everything we had, tilted beneath my feet and did not right itself.